After 7 years of marriage, my wife said, "I need space to find myself." I replied, "Have fun." Then I filed for divorce the next day and vanished from her life without a word. Emily did not know I filed. That part matters. She thought space meant I would wait around quietly while she recalibrated her feelings and decided what version of me she wanted back. She texted casually, random thoughts, photos of coffee shops, a picture of a sunset with a caption about clarity. I replied only when necessary and only about logistics, short, neutral, predictable. That change confused her. On day 4, she asked why I was being distant. I reminded her she asked for space. She said this was not what she meant. I told her this was what space looked like when taken seriously. By the time she texted me asking if I missed her, I had already filed for divorce. Mark is a 36-year-old logistics manager living in a mid-size Midwestern city, a man defined by structure, predictability, and routine. His life follows a carefully orchestrated pattern: early mornings, commute, work, gym, home. He is not impulsive, not dramatic, and values stability above almost everything else. This is not the profile of someone who makes rash decisions or acts on emotion. This is someone who calculates, observes, and moves with intention. When the story begins, Mark has been married to Emily for 7 years, together for nearly 10. On the surface, they appear to be a normal married couple with a decent life. Shared townhouse, 2 cars, joint accounts, and no children. The kind of partnership that looks functional from the outside, the kind that friends might describe as solid or stable. But beneath that veneer of normalcy, something has been slowly breaking down. Emily, 34 years old, works in marketing and describes herself as creative and expressive. She is more emotional and reactive than Mark, a difference that initially seemed manageable, even complimentary. In the early years, their division of labor felt fair and functional. Mark handled the practical elements of their shared life, bills, planning, long-term decisions, while Emily brought emotional energy and spontaneity. For the first 5 years, their marriage was fine in what Mark describes as a boring but workable way. It was not passionate or deeply connected, but it was stable, and for Mark, stability was valuable. He did not need fireworks, he needed consistency. Emily seemed content with this arrangement too, or at least she did not express discontent in any way that demanded attention or change. But over the last 2 years, something shifted. Emily became increasingly dissatisfied, though never in a way that Mark could address or fix. Her complaints were abstract, rooted in feelings rather than facts. She felt bored. She felt stuck. She felt like she had compromised too much of herself. When Mark tried to engage with these concerns by asking what concrete changes might help, Emily accused him of not understanding her or minimizing her feelings. Every attempt at clarity was reframed as emotional failure on his part. Her tone changed as well. Small conversations began to turn sharp quickly. Rolling, snide comments became routine. Constant criticism was framed as honesty, as if cruelty could be justified by calling it truth. Mark was accused of being cold because he did not engage emotionally on her schedule. He was accused of being controlling because he asked for basic clarity around money and plans. These accusations did not lead to productive conversations or resolutions. They simply layered more tension onto an already strained dynamic. Mark did not fight back, but he did not ignore what was happening either. He started paying attention in a different way. He began mentally noting patterns, complaints without requests, dissatisfaction without direction, a growing contempt towards stability itself. Emily was not asking for change. She was expressing disdain for the life they had built, but she offered no alternative vision. She wanted something different, but she could not or would not articulate what that meant. For Mark, this was unsustainable. He is someone who operates on clarity and structure. Ambiguity drains him. Emotional volatility without purpose frustrates him.
He did not need Emily to be happy all the time, but he needed her to be honest about what she wanted. And increasingly, it seemed like what she wanted was to be dissatisfied while holding him responsible for that dissatisfaction. This realization did not come all at once, but it accumulated over months, building into a quiet understanding that their marriage had become something neither of them truly wanted, but only one of them was willing to name.
The breaking point arrived on a Sunday afternoon 3 weeks before Mark filed for divorce, though Emily had no idea that moment would become a catalyst for the complete dissolution of their marriage. She sat him down with the calm demeanor of someone making a reasonable adjustment to an existing arrangement, not someone detonating 7 years of shared life. She told Mark she needed space to find herself. The phrasing was deliberate, carefully chosen to sound growth-oriented and self-aware rather than selfish or destructive. She explained that she needed distance, but not consequences. She wanted separation without disruption, the freedom to step away while keeping the safety net intact. She talked about needing time, freedom, no pressure, as if marriage were a subscription service she could pause and resume at her convenience. Mark listened without interrupting. He nodded at appropriate intervals. When she finished her prepared speech, he asked one clarifying question. What did space mean in practice? Her answer was vague, frustratingly so. Time, freedom, no pressure. Nothing concrete, nothing actionable, nothing he could plan around or accommodate with any real structure. For someone like Mark, who operates in frameworks and timelines, this was not just unsatisfying, it was unworkable. But something clicked for him in that moment, and it was not emotional, it felt logistical. He saw the situation clearly for what it was. Emily wanted the appearance of independence without the reality of consequence. She wanted to explore her feelings and options while Mark waited patiently in stasis, available whenever she decided what she wanted. This was not a partnership decision. This was a unilateral declaration with an expectation of accommodation. Mark's response was simple and devastating in its brevity. Have fun. Those 2 words landed in the conversation like a stone dropped into still water. That was the last normal conversation they ever had. Emily did not react the way she expected to. When Mark said, "Have fun," she laughed, assuming he was joking, waiting for the follow-up that would never come. The silence that followed irritated her more than anger would have. She asked if he was serious. He said yes. She asked why he was being passive-aggressive. He told her he was not being passive-aggressive at all. She had asked for space, and he was agreeing to give it to her. That answer did not satisfy her. In fact, it infuriated her. Emily launched into an emotional monologue, accusing Mark of being emotionally unavailable, claiming that his calm reaction proved her point about his coldness. She said any real husband would fight for his marriage, that his lack of resistance was actually a form of cruelty. Mark let her talk. He did not interrupt, did not defend himself, did not try to redirect the narrative. He was done explaining himself to someone who treated clarity like an attack and boundaries like betrayal. That night, Emily slept in the guest room by choice, making sure Mark noticed. Doors closed harder than necessary, lights left on, the usual performative signals designed to communicate distress and demand attention. Mark ignored all of it and slept normally, perhaps better than he had in months. The next morning, Emily acted upbeat in a way that felt forced and artificial. She was too cheerful, too casual, as if the previous night's conflict had been erased by sleep. She mentioned maybe staying with a friend for a bit, emphasizing repeatedly that it would be healthy, that it was temporary, that they were not breaking up, just evolving. That word, evolving, was carefully chosen to make instability sound like progress. Mark responded with a single word, "Okay." That simple agreement annoyed her again. She wanted reassurance. She wanted resistance. She wanted Mark unsettled, worried, chasing after her emotional breadcrumbs. Instead, she got agreement and structure. Mark asked practical questions that pulled her fantasy into the real world. How long would she be gone? What about the mortgage? What about shared accounts? What about mail? Each question made Emily more irritated because it forced her to confront the logistical reality of what she was proposing. She snapped that Mark was turning this into a transaction. Mark told her the truth. Marriage already was a transaction, whether they liked it or not. It involved legal contracts, shared assets, financial obligations, and mutual responsibilities. Romance did not exempt them from reality. Emily left that afternoon with 2 suitcases and a dramatic hug she tried to turn into a moment. Mark did not mirror the emotion. He wished her well and told her to text him if she needed anything logistical. She did not like that word, logistical. It stripped the performance of its emotional weight and reduced her departure to what it actually was, a practical problem requiring practical solutions. As soon as Emily drove away, Mark did not feel sad. He felt focused. He sat down at the kitchen table, opened his laptop, and pulled up their financials. He reviewed every document, every shared account, every asset they owned together. He made copies of everything. Then he did something Emily would never have anticipated. He called a lawyer the same day and booked the first available consultation for the next morning. Mark did not do this out of spite or revenge. He did it because he understood something fundamental that Emily did not. Space without boundaries is just avoidance with a nicer name. If Emily wanted genuine separation to figure out what she needed, then that separation needed to be real, not theoretical. And real separation meant legal clarity, financial division, and defined terms. That night, while Mark was organizing documents and preparing for his lawyer consultation, Emily posted vague, inspirational quotes on social media about growth, about choosing yourself, about making brave decisions. Friends commented with hearts and affirmations, validating her narrative without knowing the full context. Mark did not comment. He did not engage. By the time Emily texted him 2 days later asking if he missed her, Mark had already filed for divorce. This is the detail that defines everything that followed. Emily did not know he had filed. She thought space meant Mark would wait around quietly while she recalibrated her feelings and decided what version of him she wanted back, if any. She treated their marriage like a bookmark she could return to whenever the adventure outside got uncomfortable. Emily did not know Mark had filed for divorce, and that gap in knowledge shaped her entire approach during the first week of separation. She texted casually, sending random thoughts, photos of coffee shops, a picture of a sunset with a caption about clarity. These messages were designed to keep Mark emotionally tethered while she explored whatever it was she thought she needed to explore. Mark replied only when necessary and only about logistics, short, neutral, predictable. This change in his communication pattern confused Emily. She was used to more engagement, more emotional availability, more response to her moods and musings. On day 4, she asked why he was being distant. Mark reminded her that she had asked for space. Emily clarified that this was not what she meant. Mark told her this was what space looked like when taken seriously. That answer did not sit well with her. The tone of her messages shifted sharply. She accused Mark of punishing her, of trying to scare her into coming back, of manipulating her through withdrawal. Mark told her he was not trying to get her to do anything. He was simply responding to what she requested. She hated that answer because it was true, and because it removed her ability to control the narrative. Meanwhile, Mark's lawyer meeting had been straightforward. 7-year marriage, no kids, shared assets, clean timeline. The advice was simple and practical. File first, secure accounts, do not announce anything until papers are served. Mark followed that advice exactly. He opened a new checking account in his name only and moved his paycheck into it. He froze discretionary spending on the joint account. Everything he did was legal, documented, and standard procedure for someone preparing for divorce. He did not drain accounts or hide assets. He created separation. Emily noticed within 48 hours. She called Mark, angry and accusatory. She said her card had declined at brunch and that he had embarrassed her in front of her friends. Mark explained calmly that shared accounts were being restructured due to their separation. He reminded her that she had chosen this path. Emily said he was overreacting, that this was supposed to be temporary, that everyone needs space sometimes. Mark asked her a question she could not answer. How was temporary uncertainty supposed to work when mortgages and legal liability were involved? She did not have a response to that. Instead, she cried.
Then she got angry again. Then she tried a softer approach, saying she felt unsafe with how fast Mark was moving. That word, unsafe, was calculated, designed to make Mark seem threatening or unreasonable. Mark stayed calm and told her everything he was doing was standard and fully documented. 2 days later, Emily showed up at the townhouse without warning. She expected a conversation, perhaps a reconciliation scene where Mark would confess he had been hasty and they could work things out. What she got instead was a printed copy of the divorce filing notice sitting on the kitchen counter, and a quiet house that no longer felt like hers. That was the moment panic finally replaced confidence. That was when Emily realized space had consequences she had not anticipated or prepared for. She stood in the entryway staring at the paper, as if it might change if she looked long enough, as if reality would bend to her expectations if she refused to accept it firmly enough.
Emily stood frozen in the entryway, staring at the divorce filing notice with an expression that cycled rapidly through disbelief, confusion, and rising panic. She asked Mark if it was a joke. Then she asked if he was trying to scare her. Then she asked who had put him up to this. Each question assumed Mark was acting emotionally or impulsively rather than deliberately and strategically. Mark told her it was filed. He gave her the date. He explained the next steps in the process. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He simply presented the facts. Emily called him cold. She said this was extreme. She said couples take space all the time and do not blow up their marriages over it. Mark reminded her that couples who take space usually define rules and timelines. Emily had refused both. She had wanted ambiguity and open-ended uncertainty. Mark did not operate well inside uncertainty, so he had eliminated it. That answer made Emily angry again. She accused Mark of planning this behind her back, of being deceptive. Mark said yes, he had planned it, because planning was necessary when someone made the future uncertain. He did not choose the uncertainty. Emily did. He just chose not to live inside it indefinitely. Emily paced the living room, her movements agitated and unfocused. She said Mark had blindsided her. That word stood out because it was pure projection. Emily was the one who had announced she needed space without warning, without negotiation, without concern for how it would impact Mark. She expected him to absorb the impact quietly and wait for her to decide his fate. When he refused that role, she experienced it as betrayal. Emily tried to pivot. She said she did not actually want to separate. She said she just needed reassurance. She suggested maybe they should go to counseling. She said maybe she had overreacted. The speed of the reversal was impressive and completely unconvincing. Mark asked her one question: what exactly would be different if he withdrew the filing? Emily could not answer without circling back to feelings. No concrete changes, no commitments, just promises of effort and vague phrases like "work on us." Mark told her he was not interested in renegotiating under pressure. That was when the insults started. Emily said Mark was emotionally stunted. She said no woman would tolerate this behavior. She said he would regret throwing away 7 years over his pride. Mark told her to pack whatever she still needed from the house and coordinate pickup through email going forward. He said they were done talking in person. Emily laughed in disbelief. Then she cried. Then she tried to hug him. Mark stepped back, maintaining physical distance. That refusal to engage broke something in her. She left angry, slamming the door behind her. Afterward, she texted Mark paragraphs accusing him of abandonment, cruelty, emotional abuse. Mark did not respond. That night, he slept better than he had in months. The blocking happened the next morning. Mark woke up to 16 missed messages and 5 missed calls. They had escalated overnight from angry to pleading to accusatory again. Emily cycled through every emotional tone like she was throwing darts at a board, hoping one would land and provoke the response she wanted. Reading them felt pointless to Mark. Nothing new was being said, just volume. He did not reply. He went to work as usual, same commute, same coffee, same meetings.
At lunch, he stepped outside, sat on a bench, and looked at his phone one last time.
There was another message waiting when Mark checked his phone during lunch. This one accused him of stonewalling and emotional abuse. That message became the final straw. Mark decided that continued contact was no longer productive or healthy. He blocked Emily's number. He also blocked her on email, social media, and every messaging app they had ever used. Not dramatically, not in anger, but methodically, one platform at a time, with the same systematic approach he brought to everything else. He left only one channel of communication open, through his lawyer. That was it. Mark knew exactly how that action would land. Emily was accustomed to access, immediate access, emotional access, the ability to provoke reactions whenever she wanted. Blocking her removed all of it at once. There was no audience left for her distress, and no way to manufacture a response from Mark. For someone who operated through emotional escalation, this was devastating. Within an hour, Mark's sister texted him asking what was going on. Emily had called her crying, saying Mark had disappeared, that she could not reach him, that she was worried and confused. Mark told his sister the truth, briefly and without drama. He said he had filed for divorce. He said all communication was now going through lawyers. His sister understood immediately. She knew Mark well enough to recognize that he did not make decisions like this lightly or impulsively. Then Mark's phone went quiet. That silence felt different than before. It was clean. There was no tension attached to it, no waiting, no monitoring his screen for the next interruption. Just space that Mark controlled rather than space imposed on him by someone else's uncertainty. Later that evening, Mark's lawyer forwarded a message Emily had sent in all caps, demanding to know why Mark had blocked her and accusing him of being unnecessarily cruel. The lawyer asked if Mark wanted to respond. Mark said no. That was the first full day of Mark's life without Emily's voice in it in almost a decade. He cooked dinner for himself. He watched a show he enjoyed. He slept through the night without interruption or anxiety. The next day, Mark learned through a neighbor that Emily had driven by the townhouse and sat in her car for over an hour. Mark had been at the gym during that time, following his normal routine. He did not change his schedule or adjust his behavior based on her actions. Blocking Emily was not about punishment or revenge. It was about ending the loop, the cycle of provocation and reaction that had defined the final years of their marriage. Once the loop was gone, everything became very simple. Mark had clarity. He had boundaries. He had a path forward that did not depend on Emily's feelings or decisions. Emily, meanwhile, escalated sideways. She started contacting people around Mark instead of contacting him directly. Friends they had in common, co-workers she barely knew, Mark's mother, anyone she thought could pressure Mark into responding or reconsidering. The story she told them was inconsistent, but always framed Mark as unstable and sudden. According to her version, Mark had snapped without warning. He had abandoned her. He had changed overnight from the man she married into someone cold and unreasonable. The problem for Emily was that Mark's behavior had been boringly consistent. Most people who reached out to Mark already knew him well enough to notice the mismatch between Emily's dramatic narrative and Mark's actual character. Mark did not rant to these people. He did not counterattack or badmouth Emily. He told them the same thing every time, in the same calm tone. They had separated, he had filed for divorce, communication was now through lawyers, and he was fine. That calm, that consistency, made Emily's narrative harder to sell. People expected someone going through a sudden divorce to be volatile or emotional, or at least visibly affected. Mark was none of those things, which quietly contradicted everything Emily was saying about him. Emily showed up at Mark's office once, though she was smart enough not to enter the building. She waited in the parking lot after work, standing by her car as if staging a scene from a movie. Mark saw her vehicle before he saw her, recognized it immediately, and made a calculated decision. He walked past without stopping and got into his car. Emily called his name. Mark did not turn around. He started his engine and drove away, leaving her standing alone in the parking lot. The next day, Emily escalated further by emailing Mark's work account, bypassing all the personal blocks he had put in place. Human Resources forwarded the email to Mark and asked if he wanted them to intervene. Mark said yes. HR handled it quietly and professionally, sending Emily a formal communication that contact through work channels was inappropriate and would not be tolerated. That intervention seemed to finally register with Emily that her access to Mark was truly gone. At that point, the emotional tone of her communications shifted again. She sent an apology through the lawyer, long, emotional, full of carefully constructed reflection. She said she never meant for things to go this far. She said she felt discarded, like something disposable. She said she was scared of the future and uncertain about everything. She asked if they could talk one last time, framing it as closure, as if closure were something Mark owed her. Mark declined through his lawyer. Closure, he understood, is a luxury for people who did not ignore warnings for years. Closure is what people seek when they want to rewrite history or negotiate their guilt. Mark had no interest in providing that service. He had already closed the door. He did not need Emily's permission or participation to move forward. The paperwork moved quickly after Emily's apology was declined. Asset division turned out to be straightforward. 7 years of marriage, no children, clearly documented finances, and a relatively simple property situation. Emily became suddenly cooperative in a way she had never been during the actual marriage. Deadlines were met without drama. Documents were signed promptly. It was as if she finally understood the concept of seriousness when it arrived with legal letterhead and formal timelines. For years, Mark had asked for clarity and cooperation on much smaller matters: vacation planning, budget decisions, household responsibilities, and Emily had treated those requests as controlling or unreasonable. Now, faced with lawyers and court procedures, she became a model of efficiency and compliance. Mark moved his belongings out of the shared spaces gradually and deliberately, first into the guest room, then into a storage unit. He did not do this because he legally had to, but because he wanted the house to feel transitional, less like a shared past and more like an exit corridor he was moving through with purpose. One evening, Mark found a handwritten note Emily had left in the mailbox. It was dramatic, multi-page, the kind of letter someone writes when they believe words can change reality. Mark did not read it. He threw it away unopened, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. Nothing Emily could write would change the path forward. By the end of the month, Mark realized something unexpected and oddly liberating. He did not miss Emily. What he missed was the version of himself that thought patience could fix contempt, that believed accommodation could transform disdain into appreciation.
2 weeks after Mark blocked Emily completely, she finally seemed to understand that he was not coming back. That realization triggered another shift in her strategy. Her lawyer reached out, proposing a conversation without attorneys present, framing it as an opportunity for mutual understanding, faster resolution, and emotional closure. The proposal was written in conciliatory language, designed to appeal to efficiency and reasonableness. Mark declined through his lawyer and stuck to the timeline already in motion. Emily did not like losing control of the pacing or the process. She began sending messages again through the lawyer, each one slightly different in tone and approach. One framed herself as remorseful and self-aware. Another framed herself as misunderstood and unfairly judged. Yet another framed Mark as unnecessarily harsh and vindictive. She could not decide which version of the story would work, so she tried all of them simultaneously. None of them changed anything. The house appraisal came back with clean numbers and no complications. When Emily saw the figures and understood the financial reality of the division, she suddenly cared a great deal about fairness and balance. During the marriage, she had called money cold and unromantic, dismissing Mark's practical concerns as emotionally stunted. Now she wanted spreadsheets, documentation, and precise calculations. Mark noticed this irony, but did not comment on it. He simply provided the requested information through proper channels. During this phase, Mark observed something telling. Emily was no longer talking about missing him or wanting to repair the relationship. She was talking about how the divorce made her look to other people, how friends were asking questions, how she did not expect things to end this way, how she felt judged by mutual acquaintances. That shift told Mark everything he needed to know about what had actually mattered to her. A mutual friend informed Mark that Emily was telling people he had abandoned her emotionally long before the separation, that Mark had been distant and shut down for years, that the divorce was inevitable because of his coldness and unwillingness to work on the relationship. Mark did not correct this story or offer his version of events. Anyone who actually knew them both would recognize the inconsistencies. Anyone who did not know them well enough was irrelevant to his life going forward. Mark had learned that defending yourself to people who are invested in misunderstanding you is a waste of energy. The week the divorce papers finalized, Mark sold the townhouse. This decision was not born from financial necessity, but from intentionality. He did not want physical reminders of the marriage. He did not want to share geography with Emily or risk running into her at familiar places. He moved into a smaller apartment across town and deliberately kept his routines intact. Same gym schedule, same work habits, same structured approach to daily life. Emily found out about the house sale after it had already closed. She emailed Mark's lawyer asking where he was living now, framing it as a reasonable question between former spouses. The answer she received was that there was no legal reason to provide that information. Mark's new address was none of her concern. That response seemed to land with finality. The divorce finalized quietly on a Tuesday morning. There was no court appearance, no dramatic confrontation, no final face-to-face meeting. Just digital signatures, email confirmations, and a brief message from Mark's lawyer saying the process was complete. 7 years of marriage reduced to paperwork, timestamps, and bureaucratic efficiency. Mark read the email once, forwarded it to his personal archive, and closed his laptop. That was it.
Emily tried one last indirect reach after the divorce was finalized. She posted a long, carefully crafted message on social media about grief and loss, about how sometimes people leave when things get hard instead of fighting for what matters. She did not name Mark explicitly, but everyone who knew them understood exactly who the message was about. Comments poured in from friends and acquaintances offering support, validating her pain, reinforcing her preferred narrative about being abandoned by someone incapable of emotional depth. Mark did not engage with the post. He did not comment, did not like it, did not acknowledge it in any way. What surprised him was how little any of it mattered once the divorce was legally finalized. The noise felt distant and irrelevant, like overhearing a conversation in another room about people you used to know but no longer had any connection to. Mark had already moved on structurally and emotionally by the time Emily started publicly processing the end of their marriage. A week after the finalization, Mark changed his phone number. This was not because Emily had somehow found his blocked number or breached his boundaries again. It was simply another step toward a clean break. New number, new address, new routines that did not include checking over his shoulder for echoes of the past. Mark updated only the people who genuinely needed to know: close family, his employer, a small circle of actual friends. Emily emailed Mark's lawyer asking if he had changed his number, framing it as a practical question. The response she received was direct. There was no ongoing reason for contact between them. That seemed to finally penetrate. The messages stopped after that. No more attempts through friends, no more dramatic notes, no more public posts aimed in his direction. The silence this time felt permanent and complete. Mark noticed how much lighter his days became. Not happier in an exaggerated or performative way, but genuinely calmer. Decisions took less mental and emotional energy. Evenings stretched out naturally instead of feeling compressed by underlying tension or the anticipation of conflict. One night, sitting in his new apartment after an ordinary day at work, Mark realized something important about what Emily had actually wanted. She had wanted space to find herself without losing the safety net Mark represented. She wanted freedom without risk, exploration without consequence, independence without actual separation. She wanted to step off the ledge knowing the rope was still attached and Mark would be holding the other end, ready to pull her back whenever she decided she was done exploring. Mark had removed the net the moment she stepped off it. That was the part she had never anticipated.
People occasionally asked Mark if he ever regretted acting so fast, if he wondered what would have happened if he had waited, if he had given Emily more time to figure out what she wanted. Mark's answer was always the same: no. Waiting was how he had lost years of his life. Waiting was how he had allowed disrespect to become normalized. Waiting was what people did when they believed patience could transform contempt into affection. Mark had finally learned that some things cannot be fixed by giving them more time. Some things only get worse with patience. Acting decisively was how he got his life back. Acting with clarity was how he reclaimed his agency and self-respect.
About a month after everything was finalized, Mark ran into someone who used to know them as a couple. It happened at a grocery store on an ordinary Thursday night. Mark was picking up basics: chicken, rice, coffee, the mundane necessities of normal life. The woman recognized him first and gave him that cautious look people use when they are not sure what version of someone they are about to encounter. She asked how he was doing, her tone carefully neutral. Mark said he was fine. She hesitated, weighing whether to continue, then said she had heard about the divorce. Mark confirmed it with a simple yes. That was all he offered. She waited for more, clearly expecting something beyond basic acknowledgement. People expect bitterness or regret or some kind of dramatic emotional takeaway when someone mentions a divorce. When they do not get it, they seem disappointed, as if the story is somehow unfinished or unsatisfying. Mark did not give her anything else. Eventually, she nodded awkwardly and moved on. That interaction stayed with Mark because it highlighted something important about how differently he and Emily approached the end of their marriage. Emily needed the divorce to be a story, a journey with lessons, a transformation arc, a narrative about growth and self-discovery. Mark needed it to be an administrative conclusion, a problem that was identified and solved. Through mutual friends, Mark later heard how Emily was framing the divorce publicly. She said she had lost herself in the marriage. She said she was brave for choosing growth over comfort. She said Mark could not handle change or emotional complexity. It was all very tidy, very curated for social media consumption. What Emily never mentioned in her public narrative was that she had asked for undefined space while expecting guaranteed return. She never mentioned that Mark had asked for clarity and she had refused to provide it. She never mentioned that Mark stayed completely consistent in his words and actions while she escalated and contradicted herself repeatedly. Mark did not attempt to correct the public record or offer his version of events. He had learned something crucial during the marriage that carried through to the divorce. You do not win by convincing people who are invested in misunderstanding you. You win by removing yourself from the environment where misunderstanding is rewarded and manipulation is normalized. Mark's life became quieter in ways he had not fully anticipated. No more emotional negotiations over minor decisions. No more sudden mood shifts that derailed entire evenings. No more constant low-level tension disguised as normal relationship dynamics. Mark stopped bracing himself in his own home, stopped monitoring someone else's emotional temperature before speaking, stopped editing his words to avoid unpredictable reactions. The absence of conflict revealed how much energy that conflict had been consuming, energy Mark now redirected toward his own life and priorities. Emily had wanted space to find herself. What she found instead was that Mark had been the stable foundation holding everything together, absorbing her chaos, managing her uncertainty, providing structure when she offered only volatility. Once Mark let go, there was nothing left for her to lean against. 6 months after the divorce finalized, Mark's life looked smaller from the outside, but felt infinitely stronger from the inside. He lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment close to his work. He woke up early. He went to the gym consistently. He performed his job well without distraction. He came home each evening to a quiet space that stayed quiet. No emotional landmines, no background tension, no negotiations over basic respect and consideration.
Emily never contacted Mark again after that final message through the lawyer months earlier. Mark heard through a secondhand source that she had moved to a different city for what she called a fresh start. That phrasing felt entirely appropriate to Mark. Emily had always preferred resets over repairs, new beginnings over addressing actual problems, geographic change over internal growth. It was consistent with everything he had observed during their marriage. When things became difficult or uncomfortable, Emily's instinct was not to work through the challenge, but to reframe it as someone else's fault or escape to something new. People occasionally asked Mark if he felt sad about how the marriage had ended, if he experienced regret or wished things had gone differently. Mark told them the truth without embellishment. He felt resolved. Sadness, he explained, comes from ambiguity, from wondering what if and living with unanswered questions. There was no what if left in Mark's mind. The questions were answered. The situation was resolved. The marriage had not actually ended when Mark filed the papers or when the divorce was finalized. It had ended the moment Emily decided that clarity was optional and stability was something she could step away from without cost or consequence. Mark had simply formalized what was already true. Looking back with the perspective that distance provides, Mark identified the most important moment in the entire sequence of events. It was not the filing or the blocking or even the divorce itself. It was the second Emily said she needed space, and Mark realized she was asking for insurance, not independence. She wanted the freedom to explore while keeping Mark as a backup plan, a safe harbor she could return to if her exploration did not yield better options. In that moment of realization, Mark had a choice. He could play the role she had assigned him, waiting patiently while she decided his fate, or he could reject the role entirely and reclaim his agency. Mark did not argue with Emily. He did not beg or chase or try to negotiate terms she was unwilling to define. He simply wished her well and exited completely. That single decision reshaped everything that came after. If there was a lesson in Mark's experience, it was not about revenge or power or winning some kind of psychological battle. It was simpler and more fundamental than that. When someone asks for distance without boundaries, believe them about what they are really asking for. When someone treats your presence as optional, make it unavailable. When someone demonstrates through their actions that they do not value what you offer, stop offering it. Mark did not vanish from Emily's life out of cruelty or spite. He vanished because he finally understood his own worth and recognized that remaining accessible to someone who treated him with contempt was a choice, not an obligation. The months following the divorce taught Mark something valuable about the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the painful awareness of unwanted isolation. Solitude is the peaceful experience of chosen space. Mark was not lonely in his new apartment with his structured routines and quiet evenings. He was experiencing solitude he had chosen deliberately, and that choice made all the difference. He reconnected with old friends he had neglected during the marriage, not because Emily had explicitly forbidden those friendships, but because maintaining them had required energy Mark was constantly spending on managing Emily's moods and unpredictable reactions. Now that energy was available again, and Mark used it intentionally.
6 months after the divorce finalized, Mark found himself in a conversation with a colleague who was going through relationship difficulties. The colleague knew about Mark's divorce in general terms and asked tentatively if Mark had any advice. Mark considered the question carefully before answering. He told his colleague that the most important thing he had learned was the difference between working on a relationship and working against your own boundaries. Working on a relationship means both people identifying problems and committing to concrete changes. Working against your own boundaries means tolerating disrespect while calling it patience, accepting contempt while calling it compromise, and sacrificing clarity for the sake of avoiding conflict. Mark had spent 2 years doing the latter while believing he was doing the former. The colleague asked Mark if he believed all marriages that hit rough patches should end in divorce. Mark said no, absolutely not. He said some relationships go through difficult periods and emerge stronger because both people are genuinely committed to change and growth. But he also said some relationships are only difficult for one person while the other person benefits from the dysfunction. Emily had benefited from Mark's tolerance of her behavior. She could be emotionally volatile without consequence, dismissive without accountability, contemptuous without losing the stability Mark provided. Why would she change a dynamic that served her interests? Mark's mistake had been believing that his patience demonstrated love when it actually enabled dysfunction. His willingness to absorb Emily's contempt had not inspired her gratitude or motivated her growth. It had simply taught her that contempt was acceptable. Mark's life 1 year after the divorce looked unremarkable to outside observers. He worked the same job,
lived in a modest apartment, maintained predictable routines. There was no dramatic transformation, no exciting new chapter filled with adventure and reinvention. But Mark measured success differently now. He measured it in mornings without anxiety, in evenings without walking on eggshells, in decisions he could make without emotional negotiation or unpredictable blowback. He measured it in the quiet satisfaction of living according to his own values rather than constantly adjusting to someone else's instability. That was enough. That was actually everything. Emily's social media eventually went quiet about the divorce and the lessons of growth and self-discovery. Mark assumed she had moved on to new narratives, new relationships, new situations where she could frame herself as the protagonist in a story of perpetual evolution. Emily genuinely hoped she found whatever she was looking for, though he suspected the real issue was that she did not actually know what she was looking for. She only knew she was dissatisfied, and she had made that dissatisfaction Mark's problem for years. The most profound lesson Mark learned from the entire experience was about personal agency. For years, he had operated under the assumption that his role in the marriage was to solve Emily's unhappiness, to be patient while she figured things out, to provide stability while she explored her feelings. He had accepted the premise that her dissatisfaction was his responsibility to fix. The truth he finally understood was simpler. He could not fix another person's chronic dissatisfaction, and trying to do so had nearly broken him. When people asked Mark now if he would ever marry again, he said maybe, with the right person, under different circumstances, but he also said he would never again enter a relationship with someone who treated clarity as unreasonable or boundaries as punishment. He would never again stay with someone who used emotional volatility as a form of control. He would never again mistake his own patience for love when it was actually fear of conflict. Mark had spent 7 years learning these lessons. The divorce had been expensive and emotionally exhausting and publicly uncomfortable. But the alternative, remaining in a marriage with someone who treated his presence as optional and his needs as negotiable, would have cost him something far more valuable than money or comfort. It would have cost him himself. Mark chose differently, and every quiet, ordinary evening in his small apartment reminded him that he had chosen correctly.